Welcome to Course 4, Foundation, Certified Supply Chain Professional, CSCP, course, by SPAO Academy. Topic 2, Global Supply Chain Networks, Section 7, Connectivity, Visibility, and Legal Considerations. Lesson 2, Cross-Border Data Flows. Cross-Border Data Flows. Welcome to Lesson 2 of Section 7. In the previous lesson, we discussed the technologies that create connectivity and visibility in a supply chain. However, a modern supply chain is not just a network of physical goods, it is also a vast network of information. This information, ranging from a customer's name and address to proprietary manufacturing blueprints, constantly flows across international borders. For a beginner, it's crucial to understand that moving data is not as simple as sending an email. When data crosses a political border, it enters a new legal jurisdiction with its own set of rules. This lesson will explore the concept of cross-border data flows, why they are essential for modern supply chains, and the complex legal landscape that governs them. Lesson objectives. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to define cross-border data flows and identify the types of data moving through global supply chains. Explain why the free flow of data is critical for supply chain operations. Identify the main legal and regulatory challenges, including data sovereignty and localization laws. Understand the concept of adequacy decisions and standard contractual clauses as mechanisms for legal data transfer. Appreciate the strategic importance of data governance in global supply chain management. Key terms and definitions. Cross-border data flow, CBDF, the movement of data across national borders, typically involving the transfer, storage, or processing of digital information in a country different from its origin. Data sovereignty, the concept that digital data is subject to the laws of the country in which it is located. Data localization, a legal requirement mandating that data about a nation's citizens or residents be collected, processed, and stored inside the country, often before being transferred internationally. Personally identifiable information, P. Any data that could potentially identify a specific individual, e.g., name, address, IP address, national ID number. Adequacy decision, a ruling by a governing body, like the European Commission, that a non-EU country provides a comparable level of data protection to the EU's own, allowing data to flow freely to that country. Standard contractual clauses, SCCs, pre-approved, standardized sets of contractual terms and conditions that companies can use to legally transfer personal data from the EU to countries without an adequacy decision. 1. What are cross-border data flows? In a global supply chain, data is the invisible thread that ties every step together. A cross-border data flow occurs anytime this digital information is transmitted from one country to another. Examples of data flowing across borders in a supply chain. Customer orders, an online order placed in France for a product made in China. The customer's name, address, and payment details flow from France to the Chinese manufacturer's servers. Shipment tracking, a logistics provider in the US tracking a container ship traveling from Singapore to Rotterdam. The GPS and status data are sent to a central cloud server located in Ireland. Supplier communication, an automotive company in Germany sending updated design specifications for a car part to its factory in Mexico. Financial transactions, a retailer in Brazil paying an invoice to a textile supplier in India. 2. Why is the free flow of data essential? Restricting the flow of this data would cripple a modern supply chain. Here's why. Real-time visibility. To know exactly where a shipment is, data must flow freely from the container, perhaps near the Panama Canal, to the company's headquarters, perhaps in Japan. Efficiency and automation. Automated inventory systems rely on constant data exchange between warehouses and suppliers to trigger reorders. If data is blocked or delayed, shelves can go empty. Global collaboration. Product designers, manufacturers, and quality control teams are often spread across the globe. They need to share large files and updates seamlessly. Customer experience. Customers expect to track their orders in real time. This requires a continuous flow of data from the last-mile delivery carrier back to the retailer's website. 3. The legal landscape. Data sovereignty and localization. This is where the complexity begins. Different countries view data, especially personal data, very differently. The two main concepts that create barriers to data flow are data sovereignty and data localization. Data sovereignty is the principle that a country has the authority to govern and control the data generated within its borders. For example, the data of a French citizen, even if stored on a server in the US, is still subject to French and EU law. Data localization laws are the practical enforcement of data sovereignty. They are rules that force companies to keep a copy of the data within the country's physical borders. Major regulatory frameworks: the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, European Union. The GDPR is the gold standard for data protection. It strictly controls how personal data of EU citizens can be collected, used, and transferred. It severely restricts the transfer of this data to countries that the EU does not deem to have adequate data protection laws. China's cybersecurity law and data security law. These laws impose strict data localization requirements on critical information infrastructure, operators, and companies handling important data. This means they are often required to store data collected in China on servers located within China. Other emerging laws. Countries like Brazil, LGPD, India, Digital Personal Data Protection Act, and various US states, e.g., CCPA in California, are creating their own, often divergent, data protection rules. 4. How do companies comply? Mechanisms for legal transfer. If a company in the EU needs to send customer data to a supplier in a country without an adequacy decision, like the US before 2023, or many others, they cannot simply do so. They must use a legally approved mechanism. The two most common are adequacy decisions. The European Commission has determined that a handful of countries, e.g., Japan, UK, Switzerland, Israel, have privacy laws strong enough to protect EU data. Data can flow freely to these countries as if they were inside the EU. Standard contractual clauses, SCCs, these are like legal bridges. They are contracts approved by the European Commission that both the data exporter, e.g., the EU company, and the data importer, e.g., the US supplier, must sign. These contracts include binding obligations to protect the data and grant rights to the individuals whose data is being transferred. This is the most common mechanism used by thousands of companies worldwide. 5. Strategic implications for supply chain managers. For a beginner, it's important to see this not just as a legal problem, but as a strategic supply chain issue. Supplier selection. When choosing a new supplier or technology partner, their ability to handle data securely and comply with international laws is just as important as their price or quality. Contract negotiation. Supply chain contracts must now include detailed clauses about data ownership, data processing, and compliance with laws like GDPR. Technology architecture. Companies must decide where to host their data. Do they use a global cloud provider, like AWS or Azure, that has data centers in multiple countries to help with localization laws? Or do they build their own infrastructure? This has cost and performance implications. Summary. Cross-border data flows are the lifeblood of the modern, interconnected global supply chain, enabling visibility, efficiency, and collaboration. However, these flows are heavily regulated by a patchwork of national laws based on the principles of data sovereignty. The EU's GDPR is a landmark regulation that has inspired similar laws worldwide, restricting the transfer of personal data to countries with weaker protections. Companies must navigate this complexity using tools like adequacy decisions and standard contractual clauses, SCCs, to ensure legal compliance. For supply chain professionals, understanding and planning for data flow regulations is no longer just an IT issue. It is a core component of strategic sourcing, risk management, and global operations. I really appreciate you spending your time with me today. If you want to learn more, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your like means the world to us and helps this channel grow so we can continue bringing you great content. Thanks again, and see you on the next video.